Hello there. Welcome to our video series of conversations with readers of our book, Building Trust and Relationship at the Speed of Change. I'm here with my partner, Jerry Nagel, and our guest today is Kerry Judd from Bermuda. And Kerry, we'd like to start just by asking you to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kerry Judd. I am the Managing Director of New Beginnings Limited, which is a consultancy that offers engagement, facilitation, and communications. But I also am the Executive Director of an organization, a nonprofit called Bermuda First. And Bermuda First has been tasked by the Premier or the head of the country to develop a national socioeconomic plan.
Thanks much, Kerry. Good to see you today. Kerry, you've been one of our colleagues that have followed Worldview Intelligence since we first started working on it several years ago, and have contributed to our thinking on it, and which we greatly appreciated. And it was an early reader of the book, and so we'd like to invite you to maybe share some perceptions or reflections you might have on the book.
I think for me, the book there's a couple of things that come up for me when you ask me that question. One is that it doesn't matter whether you're someone who is seeking out information on Worldview Intelligence or who are just looking to develop yourself and be interested in how we think or how other people think. It's an easy read, but it's one that makes sense. And so it's not the concepts that are there. When they land with you, you're like, wow, why didn't I think of that? Because it makes total sense. But it's something, the power behind it for me also is that it's the learnings that come out of it for me, I can apply personally within my own relationships, either me as a mom or me as a daughter or a sister or a friend, but also I can apply it professionally. And the other thing is that it's not a book that has to be read cover to cover. So you can read it cover to cover, page 1, through 2, or you can kind of look and you can go from chapter to chapter and read it out of order, and it still all makes sense when you bring it all together. So I think those are kind of some things that jump out at me when I think about that.
That's fantastic, actually. And it certainly makes me happy to hear that it almost doesn't matter where you start reading, that there's some relevance that you can pick up and also some coherence throughout the book. As I mentioned at the very beginning, you live in Bermuda, and we know that this is a country that has historically been quite segregated and also has a very rich cultural history. And so we're wondering, how do you imagine that Worldview Intelligence and the Worldview Intelligence approach could help build bridges in overcoming some of the impacts of the history?
I feel like I need to raise my hand and say I'm biased in this because of how strongly I feel. I don't believe that our country will be able to move forward in its full strength unless and until Worldview Intelligence is brought. We have a rich cultural history. We have but we have the good stuff and we have the really painful negative stuff. We have racial segregation. We have cultural segregation. So, in Bermuda, it definitely was and still is very much a black and white thing. But we also have the Portuguese element here. And so historically, there were 3 segments of individuals. Whites were up here, and then the blacks were down at the bottom, and the Portuguese were slightly better, slightly higher than blacks. There, obviously, over time, there has been progress. We're nowhere near where we need to be, and there is an awful lot of pain in Bermuda. And I think, Worldview Intelligence, the foundation of Worldview Intelligence would be the foundation of healing for Bermuda. It's not asking you to forgive. It's not asking you to forget. All it is doing is creating the opportunity for you to see or be curious as to why someone else feels the way that they do. And having seen it in action, that curiosity, not always, but often then leads to an opening to want to know more, to want to understand more, and to become in relationship with somebody that you may never have wanted to even create a relationship, purely because you ended up in a conversation based in Worldview Intelligence. So for me, for Bermuda, I think it's our future. I truly do. I feel like if we are going to get out of the economic impact and the health impact that we've had from COVID, if we are going to fix um, the issues of education and healthcare and immigration, we can't do that without healing. And worldview intelligence is one of the foundational pieces of it.
Wonderful. Thanks much, Kerry. And I've always very much enjoyed the conversations that we've had and had with some of your friends there in Bermuda about its rich history. I find it quite fascinating, and look forward to more conversations. One of the things that you've brought to our work, which we greatly appreciated, is your strong background in marketing and communications, and that lens that you bring to looking at messaging and so on. And we're just wondering how your experience with Worldview Intelligence may have impacted your thinking about communications strategies.
I think there's a couple of things. One is I've almost shifted from communications to me is almost a word I don't even want to use anymore. And I'm almost hesitant to use engagement because engagement has become a buzzword. So maybe it's authentic conversation in whatever format that there's so many formats. But there's been surprises for me. So, the project that we did with the Ascendant Group, where we were looking to build the values of the organization, not to have some little pretty poster on the wall, but because we really wanted to bring the company together as a team for progress and to improve things. And I would have never thought that there was a worldview application there until we were in that project and I was able to see that application. From a communications perspective, it really teaches you to be, it takes thoughtful to a new level. So with communications, you have to be strategic, right? You have to be strategic in what you say, and you have to take into consideration the demographic. I think what Worldview Intelligence taught me was it's yes, there's strategy there, but it's actually more about being really thoughtful about what you're saying and the impact of what you're going to say, not just for the benefit, if you're doing it because of from a corporate perspective or even from a third sector, where there's a cause behind it, that you need to think two ways. And communication then becomes, even if it is a push communication, if you bring worldview in, you almost want to create that push communication to enable the pull as well. So there's a thoughtfulness in that wasn't there, thoughtfulness and then strategy.
I think that's a really interesting discernment around strategy and thoughtfulness. And I've never thought about it in exactly that way before, but I think that thoughtfulness then allows the strategy to be stronger once we begin to implement it.
And maybe a little bit more authentic. Like if you're coming from a corporate perspective, if you're really being thoughtful about your audience versus being thoughtful about what you want to achieve, then there's a level of authenticity there that is different than when you're doing something to just drive a behavior.
You're really describing both your approach and the work that you do to your work with your clients, and you're describing our approach as well, because the Worldview Intelligence approach really is a relational approach. And that's why we're focused on how do we be collaborative with the people that we work with, whether it's colleagues like you or it's the clients that we work with, because we strongly believe that's where we get the best out of the work that we do and the relationship as well.
It's taking the cookie cutter approach out and putting relationship in. But I don't think it's going to be possible unless the organization or the individual doing it is really doing it for that reason. I don't believe that you can be authentically thoughtful if you're trying to fake it, because it'll just go back to being strategic.
I also think that what you just shared circles back to the first question that Kathy asked about Bermuda and the intercultural relationships, in that when I hear you think about thoughtfulness, I hear a process of building trust. As we say, trust and relationship, but if we really want to make progress in some of the most challenging issues that we face as societies, whether Bermuda or the US or Canada or elsewhere, there needs to be some foundation of trust in each other, that we're committed to the work that needs to be done. And I think, that's at the core of worldview intelligence, but I think it's at the core of the work that all three of us believe in.
I think there's a, and I say this in a positive, there's a sneakiness to it, because you don't go in there. I think that if I were to put on any kind of a workshop, or be hired to or engaged to do an engagement exercise, and I went out and said, and this is all about voting and trust, and we're going to be healing, and you get the same players, the highly passionate people who want to address the issue, but you actually won't be addressing the issue. Whereas you're there for whatever reason you're there. So, it might be leader development. It might be our past project of an electricity sector policy stakeholder engagement or public engagement. And yet, through the method, or you're there to rebuild a team that's broken, who has no intention of trusting each other. And just through being in conversation and actually having the chance to see that there are more similarities than there are differences. Trust comes in different levels, but it has to start somewhere, and it can't be forced. And I think that's the beauty of worldview intelligence, is that there's no forcing. There is the intention that we go in hoping that it will be there, but it's not forced or faked. It's just the creation of the opportunity if someone chooses to step in. And it creates the ability to step in a safe way, without you having to choose to be there because you want to heal your hurt. It may be hurt that you don't even know you have. You may not even think that trust is an issue, but you just create relationship with someone across the table that you've never met before, that you would have completely different circles. And then it opens up possibilities for conversations outside of the room and beyond.
The word that popped into my head when I heard you say that, Kerry, is unexpected. Like there's an unexpected to it. So it all works. And I think that that's what Jerry and I first noticed as we began to introduce the idea of worldviews into the work that we were doing, is that it had an unexpected impact on the nature of the conversations, and then the nature of the relationships, that it seemed to build a connection of trust in ways that we didn't even anticipate. But in watching what was happening, that's where we began to understand the real power in how we talked about worldviews, but also how we invited those conversations.
The most recent project that we did, where it was a fractured team, and we did talk about in advance that we're doing this to rebuild team and to build trust. So that had been fed into the space, and we knew coming into it that there were some folks in the room that would rail against it purely because that had been put into the space, and yet there was growth in them. Even if there was an expectation walking in of this isn't going to work, the individuals that chose to step into it anyway still came out of it with something, having moved forward in some way, shape, or form, personally or professionally.
Well, thanks so much, Kerry, for your reflections here this morning. They've been really helpful and encouraging, and we're just wondering, before we end our morning, if you have any additional thoughts you might like to share with us.
Yeah, I would say for anybody that's listening, that's kind of thinking about this is not a professional thing. This is not a personal thing. It is something to explore if you're interested. And I know for me, it's been life-changing, and it has shifted a little bit of who I am in a good way. It's shifted professionally. I put a complete pivot on how I choose to approach my work, and both I and my clients have reaped the benefit of that. And it's something that I certainly will be doing my utmost to bring to Bermuda. Not because there's a potential to make money off of it, but because I truly think that any community, no matter what size, the more the exposure, the more we learn how to create relationship, how to be in relationship with people who have a different perspective, who have different life experiences, that there's more of a chance that we all can come together as a community behind what's important. So I would just invite anyone who is curious to pick it up, have a read, and start a new journey of exploration.
That's fantastic, Kerry. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the people who've been watching our video series of conversations.